Buonasera, hello world, and greetings from the global village. Here we are, Monday night webinars. I'm so happy. This is the number 11. So we've been running this series of Monday night webinars for 11 weeks. Looking forward to our grand finale on July the 20th for the Global Village Day. So I'll tell you later a few words. In the meantime, I see you are connecting. Hello, 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 my friends. Hello. Feel free to say hi on the chat using the Facebook comments or YouTube channel. So feel free to say hi. Feel free to say where are you right now, who you are. So we are a community. We are the Marshall McLuhan's community on Facebook. It's a private group on Facebook with thousands of people, actually. And we are also live streaming on the McLuhan Institute YouTube channel. This is a public channel instead. And so we are, thanks to the generosity of Andrew McLuhan, the director of the McLuhan Institute, so we are live streaming on YouTube as well. So on YouTube and on Facebook. In fact, I see from Facebook, I see Alex Kuskus, the mind behind the McLuhan Galaxy blog. Thank you, Alex, for your support to this series of Monday Night webinars. I see St. George Publishing from YouTube, Alfonso from Cleveland, John Caputo from Spokane, Washington, US, and Julia Hildebrand. Hello, Julia. So nice to see you again. And Clinton, folks, or morning or afternoon, good evening. That's right. So we are live streaming. And so it's late night, of course, in Europe. It's early morning in Japan, China, or Australia, and so on. And it's afternoon in the West Coast, of course. So great. And in fact, speaking of the McLuhan Institute, here is Andrew. Hello, Andrew. Hello. Hello, Andrew McLuhan, back in the house. Yeah, we were in close by, right? This past weekend, I learned about Picton, which is a proud loyalist town. I learned about they are still proud loyalist as a town, and I'll like to know more about that. And again, Bob from New York somewhere. I think it's Monday already. I think it's in Japan. It's Tuesday. In Australia, it's Tuesday already. And Elaine, thank you, Elaine, for coming back. Hello. And by the way, so this is the. Hello, Ray from Vienna, USA. Ray will be presenting a nice project for during the Global Village Day. So I'll tell you more. So keep an eye on Ray's project on the Tetrad. And from Brazil, Wilson, the gift magician and expert. Good evening. So Masood, great. Thank you for coming back, Masood. It's nice to see you again. And we're here live streaming. That's super nice. And so, as usual, I warm up for before introducing our special guest speakers tonight. I see all of them in the backstage. You can't, folks, you can't see the backstage, but I can see they are all connected, and in a little while I'll be presenting all of them. All right. So, in the meantime, I was talking about the Global Village Day, and I wanted to again make the announcement, the call for participation. Yes, my friends, folks in the Marshall McLuhan's community, and larger media ecology community, the McLuhan Institute community. So please take a note, because I'm still trying to open up the Global Village Day to the community. So if you have an idea, if you want to bring a special guest, if you have something interesting related to the global village in the post-pandemic world, so rethinking the global village in the post-pandemic world, feel free to reach me out. Okay, it's a call for participation. So I'm very, very happy to present any projects related to McLuhan, the global village, and how to deal with, how to navigate this challenging times, and possibly bringing good vibes to challenge and face this challenging times, which is the same we are doing in this series of Monday night webinars. And by the way, I told you already, this is the tonight is the last Monday night webinar. We're going to technically skip next Monday and be back in 2 weeks, July the 20th, for the Global Village Day. However, next week there will be a Monday night webinars the best of the Monday night webinars. So if you miss some episodes in one night, you will be able to make up. So there will be a recap. There will be the best of 11 Monday night webinars from April to July. And so I'll see you again, of course, next week. But today is technically the last Monday night webinars with live guests. Okay. And of course, again, is the we are looking forward to the Global Village Day. Here you see on the July the 20th. All right, I see you are. Let me say hi to a few friends. Osborne Village Day. All right, Clinton. So I see you are talking each other. So that's nice. Hans, hello Hans, fellow at Massey College, and hello Hans and thank you for joining us tonight. And all right, and let me say hi to, okay, this is a Facebook user. Buonasera a tutti. Buonasera, Facebook user, but I don't know who you are because we are live streaming on a private. So you are commenting from a private Facebook group for a technical reason. If you want to show up your name, my dear friends and folks, please just visit streamyard.com/Facebook. And in 1 second, you will be able to grant StreamYard permission to just grab your name and photo profile, which is technically a public information. So you can allow StreamYard to grab your name and photo profile, and so your name and beautiful photo profile will show up on the comments. Otherwise, you will look like, again, an anonymous Facebook user. And let me say hi to Ruthan. Hello, Ruthan. Thanks for hosting. So thank you for coming, Ruthan. That's nice. And Mark Belanger was our guest this past week, 1 week ago. Thank you, Mark, for coming back as a viewer. And by the way, again, feel free to say hi, feel free to interact. So again, we are a community. As said, we are here to foster a sense of togetherness, a sense of facing this state of lockdown and isolation to some extent, in response to this state of isolation, with togetherness, with the lessons we can learn from the current situation. This is my core question, right? We've seen that the lockdown has been described as the biggest psychological experiment ever undertaken. And so we are here to understand, to reflect on what kind of lessons we can learn from this situation, and how we can even imagine the post-pandemic world through the lens of media ecology, through the lens of media studies. We've been using a kind of a neologism, PandeMedia, right? So the idea that through the lens of media we can better understand what's going on around us. Let's say that this is a kind of what's going on session, okay? And tonight, again, we will discuss about what's going on. All right, I see Sal. Hello, Sal. Great to see you again. Sal Greco from the global village, right? So, right, that's well said, well said, well said. All right, it's 10:11. I think it's time, as usual, to start presenting my special guests. Oh, no. Let me just say a few words, actually, about the Global Village Day. I wanted to show you a few. Oh, here with this Global Village Day. And firstly, if you want to see the schedule, just check on globalvillageday.ca. And then here you see Global Village Day, Monday, July the 20th. We are streaming both on Facebook and YouTube. Our sponsors, the estate of Marshall McLuhan, and then the McLuhan Salons, the McLuhan Institute, and the McLuhan Foundation. So how many McLuhans, right? Nice. The McLuhan Foundation, they are all sponsoring this global marathon. Let's see. We have bunches of guests. There will be many special guests all across the world, because we celebrate the global village. So from any latitude, from noon Toronto time till midnight, speakers and guests from all across the world will show up and share ideas, thoughts, and good vibes to rethink the global village in a post-pandemic age. And so some of them, among many others, but just put some of them, Michael McLuhan, Derek de Kirchhoff from Canada, Elena Lamberti from Italy, and then Angela Kruani from Germany, Carlos Scolari from Spain, Kalina Rogodzinska from Poland, Douglas Copeland from Canada, Andrew McLuhan, Arthur Croker, and many others. So check it out. To go on the globalvillageday.ca and you will see the full schedule, the lineup of guests and speakers. And as I said, there's a sort of call to action. If you call for participation, not call for participation. If you have ideas, if you know any interesting speakers for the Global Village Day, just reach me out. And by the way, all guests and speakers who attended the Monday night webinars will be invited to join us again. So there will be a crowded lineup of speakers for this McLuhanesque. Thank you, Daniel, by the way, for catching that. The McLuhanesque marathon exploring the post-pandemic world. And so, because it's a marathon, we will have a torch. There will be a symbolical torch to cross the whole world. And through this symbolical torch, we will spend 12 hours together, live streaming, and with bunches of speakers. And by the way, at midnight, we will have a shot. We will celebrate the Marshall McLuhan's birthday, because Marshall McLuhan's birthday is on the July the 21st, right? So at midnight, Toronto time, stay with us until midnight, even a little bit further, to celebrate the Marshall McLuhan's birthday. So again, I'm very excited. And it's a community exercise. It's a community building exercise. Again, it's not me just hosting. It's made up out of a community, right? This Global Village Day, it's really a global, international lineup of friends, colleagues, and people who care about understanding what's going on in our global village. And possibly how to make our global village a better place in this current state of crisis or opportunity. All right, all right, all right. I spoke too much, so I will. I think I will be nice. It will be nice finally to introduce our special guests. And John Caputo, it's nice that folks, it's called for participation intention. No, it's just a typo. So sorry. And thank you, John, for catching that. So I'm going to fix right now for all right. Thank you for all right, fixed. All right, so now it's time to and you see our folks. So thank you for. We launched a pan game, word playing. Always, in fact, Andrew said no. It's international, not intentional. It's international. So thank you, Andrew. I think you will deserve. You would deserve a special, the rank of panist in our community. So thank you. And again, before introducing, and now that's the last comment. Tomorrow is Ringo Starr's 8th birthday, and I think there is a global village story that has well regarding popular music. John, I will check it out. So thank you, John, for raising this thing. So I'll check it out. So Ringo, happy birthday. Ringo Starr's 8th birthday. All right. And again, so you are always welcome to comment, share your thoughts, share your ideas. Please be brief, okay? So we can screen your comments. We can share your ideas on the live screen. All right, and now, promise. Now, finally, it's time to start. It's time to start with our first special guest for tonight. Before introducing, in order to introduce our special guest, I wanted to show, if I find it, I wanted to show this this picture. Here we are. So imagine how many times have you seen beautiful, nice, and cute cats on your social media streams, or how many times you have seen some kind of animals on logos, brands, and so on. So we take for granted how animals and animal bodies particularly shape our I would say our semantic environment, right? Our semiosphere, the way we really conceive the semantic environment around us. So how those nice animals are crowded into our social media. And in fact, the person I'm going to introduce as a specialist, she took for granted, she not took for granted, so she wanted to take seriously how animal bodies are part of our semantic environment and how they shape, how this kind of anthropomorphism, right, is related to media and communication. So brilliant ideas. And in fact, our speaker is a professor of environmental humanities and media studies at York University, research and teaching in the areas of Canadian and modern culture, cultural studies, media theory, human-animal relations, and among many other awards and publications. Again, she published with MIT Press in 2019 Virtual Menageries, Animals as Mediators in Network Cultures. And so it's a really a great pleasure to welcome into the Monday night webinars Jody Berland. Jody, hello.
Hi, Paolo. Thank you. for that nice welcome.
Yeah, no, thank you too for joining us tonight. So thank you very much for accepting my invitation. So first of all, where are you, Jody, right now? Are you somewhere in
I'm in
Toronto's
Toronto.
area?
I'm in Midtown Toronto, about a block away from Marshall McLuhan's former house. I walk by there almost every day with my dog, who is quite indifferent to the history of that house. But I always like to look at it, and I feel close to the McLuhan legacy as well as to the McLuhan house.
Sure, great.
I'm getting an echo. I'm going to try to put in my earphones and see if that will stop the echo.
Oh yeah, because I think maybe it may be some echo. All right. In the meantime, okay, I'll try to do that. And by the way, so for all folks in the all folks in the McLuhan communities, they know very well that here you are, Jody, that Witchwood Park in Toronto, right? Number 3 in Witchwood Park. If you come by Toronto, come to visit Witchwood Park number 3, where which was the last house in Toronto, McLuhan's house. In the meantime, Andrew says hi from Facebook. And I see some other puns coming. All right. And so sometimes you walk by the Marshall McLuhan's house in Toronto, Jody. Are you teaching right now? Have you been teaching online over the past few weeks?
I'm teaching. Yeah, I teach online a graduate course this summer called Images of Animals. So I have students in a few different programs taking this course.
Yeah, which
Tomorrow
is a very kind of
12 Monkeys.
All right, which is a very kind of interdisciplinary take. So, because I didn't mention that actually your book is not just focused on the contemporary visual or semantic environment, as I like to say, but it starts from the earliest 15th century, right? It's a kind of historical and contemporary exploration on the relationship between animal images and our media and visual images. So I think it's a very interdisciplinary, historical, and media history work, right?
It's so interdisciplinary that no one knows what to do with it. I think I'm still waiting for a review to come out because it's falling right between media studies, animal studies, science and technology studies, and environmental studies. So, but I'm glad that you started with the cats, because this is what first started to make me think about animals as mediators, was wondering why there were so many cats on the internet. As soon as there was social media, there were cats. And in fact, if you look at the first video ever posted on YouTube, it's the founder of YouTube standing in front of an elephant in a zoo. So I started to pay attention to the way that animals were inaugurating all of these new forms of technological connection and why that was. And it does go back historically, although in very different ways, because I was talking about the giraffe of 1414, in the way that you couldn't understand the giraffe being sent from Bengal to China without understanding the ship that it was sent on. And you couldn't understand the ship without the giraffe. And so the whole idea that we have to think about the medium differently to encompass both the object and also the animal body.
Right. And also I was thinking that since if we look back at the history of humankind, animals were always provided with a special symbolical powers, symbolical meanings. So from a semiotic perspective, maybe our next guest will appreciate or will provide us with some semiotic insights. But from a symbolic, I would say also perspective, animals always played an important role to puzzle, foster human imagination, human even the spirituality, right? So, and to some extent, I think our we like cats on social media because they foster a sense of cuteness, but also a sense of human animal relationship, that kind of spiritual mystery relationship between animals and humans, right? Such an interesting topic, right? Great.
Right.
And so,
But it's interesting that you mentioned semiotics, because a lot of the images in the book are essentially semiotic constructs. But one of the things that the pandemic has shown us is that our relationships with animals are not only semiotic, they're also biological and evolutionary and viral.
yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. We will talk
And
more
political.
about absolutely.
Yeah.
We will talk more about this. I have a few questions, and I want to know more about this also because your research, actually, your insights about the biological foundations. In the relationship between animals and humans is one of the lessons we can learn from the current situation. So I think your insights will be much appreciated in our McLuhan's community tonight. All right, so Jody, thank you for. So we are warming up. Okay, so I'll be back to you in shortly. Okay, after introducing our other guests tonight, and then we will keep chatting. Okay, thank you, Jody. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, great. In the meantime, welcome everybody. I see you are still chatting on the Facebook group. And by the way, let me say hi to Jonathan Small, the one of my students at U of T Media Studies Book and Media Studies. You forgot the book. You forgot the book and Media Studies program. That's nice. All right. And we have already a comment response. Animals make us human, right? Interesting. Maybe there is room for some reflections on that. Okay. All right. And I think it's time now to move on to our next speaker, our next special guest for tonight. And in fact, I told you there was a kind of many semiotic connections to the field of semiotics and continental philosophy. And in fact, our next guest speaker is a professor of communication and media studies at Ontario Tech University in Oshawa, Ontario. He received a SBA in philosophy at the University of Toronto, actually, and then philosophy in the University of Alberta, and then York University PhD. So is well known among many other things. I wanted to thank you, by the way, Alex Kuskes, for putting together biographies of our special guests every Monday night webinar. I do skip all the times, all the parts, but I want to just point out a few things. Firstly, he is a specialist in not only continental philosophy, I will say the realm of philosophical legacy of Deleuze and Guattari, and in fact, he extensively published on Deleuze studies on Félix Guattari and the age of semio-capitalism, and Félix Guattari critical introduction as well, and many other essays on the same topic. But also he is well known in the Marshall McLuhan's community for a McLuhan and Baudrillard Masters of Implosion is, I think, the first and ever unique and only comparison between Baudrillard and McLuhan, a comparison and also an exploration on how those two intellectual giants of the 20th century are connected each other. And so it's a great pleasure. It's a great pleasure finally to host and to welcome in the Monday night webinar Gary Genosko. Hello, Gary.
Hey,
Hello,
hello,
hello.
Paolo. Nice to
How are
meet
you?
I'm much the same as I've been for the last 3 or 4 months. Just hiding out in downtown Toronto here, trying to avoid the heat and the construction.
I see.
Trying to keep busy in my office and not get up to too much trouble.
I see. And by the way, we have a few friends saying hi on Genosko's book. By the way, yes, that's another. It's a 3-volume kind of anthology on McLuhan. You published back in the 90s, I think, right, Gary?
Just the early 2000s, I think it came out.
Oh, early 2000, yeah.
Yeah. That was one of those of 2 different sets of those collections that I did for Routledge at the time. They were interested in selling them to the international libraries around the world, the major research libraries around the world, and they were putting together these massive collections. Some of them were much longer than the 3 volumes of the ones that I did. Some were up to 6 volumes, depending on the thinker. And certainly the McLuhan collection could have been much, much longer. But budgets are always an issue. So
I think many of us are very grateful to you, Gary, for your contribution to the Marshall McLuhan's legacy, to the Marshall McLuhan's canonification, the canon, right? The canon of McLuhan thinking, McLuhan thought in the field of media studies. So I think you are acknowledged as one of those who really mastered and brought McLuhan back. I call it the McLuhan's Renaissance, right? You just early 2000s, I think there was sort of Marshall McLuhan's Renaissance, and then back into the media studies field in a different way, right?
It coincides. The Baudrillard McLuhan project was my postdoctoral project.
I see.
It was a little bit premature because it began somewhat early in 1994, before the McLuhan Renaissance had really taken hold. But by the end of the 90s, it was evident to everyone that his ideas were still quite salient and significant. And for all of those European intellectuals who encountered his thought in the 60s, they were slowly rethinking and reintegrating some of his concepts into more contemporary languages, just as cyberculture started to blossom.
Yeah. And, our folks in the communities are always keen to contribute, to be part of this discussion. In fact, thank you, Zarvox Altman, for remembering the Harley Parker, another master, I will say, another master in the McLuhan galaxy, right? There's an intellectual artist, museum curator, and so on, that really gave a great contribution within the Marshall McLuhan's cohort, right? So Harley Parker is another of one of your subjects of studies, right?
Absolutely. I've been working on Harley's contributions for several years, trying to bring them closer to the center of the stage and make them better known, because his activities were not always well documented. He was primarily a painter and taught painting at Ontario College of Art for many years, and eventually, returned to painting later in his life after a very fruitful period working directly with Marshall in Toronto, and then again from a distance in Vancouver when he went back to the West Coast to stay with his son, Blake.
Yeah, but Harley Parker was involved at Rome Museum as well as a curator or something like, right?
Yeah, he was a head of design and installation in one of the sections of the museum. And so his masterpiece was the Hall of Fossils, which opened in January 1967.
The general system, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, so I was just keeping an eye on the chat to let you know how you are very well known in the McLuhan's community. In fact, Alfonso is remembering another masterpiece on your scholarship in semiotics, critical semiotics, a theory from information to affect. And I do agree, it's priceless and it's a great contribution. And you are kind of part of the Toronto semiotics circle, right? So I remember we met there once at Ryerson. The Toronto semiotics circle was established, I think, back in the 60s in Toronto at the University of Toronto, Victoria University, Marcel Danesi, and CBEOC, and so there is such a great intellectual tradition in semiotics. So how you came into that tradition?
I began attending meetings of the Toronto Semiotics Circle, believe it or not, as an undergraduate at University of Toronto, because I was a philosophy major at Victoria College.
So you met CBEOC, Danese, of course.
And Paul Buissac.
Paul.
A very important contributor, and created the summer institutes in semiotic and structural studies, which were powerhouses, absolutely the rock star status intellectuals of the world gathering each summer, often on the Victoria campus, but sometimes with CBEOC at Indiana.
I see.
And elsewhere for the first few years. I mean, it was just fantastic. Place to encounter, take seminars with some of the intellectual leaders.
Wow. It's such interesting to me that Toronto back in the 60s and 70s and then even 80s, it was such a great intellectual subsoil, right, for making these ideas germinate. So I think we will discuss more about the legacy of the Toronto semiotic circle one day. Okay, Gary?
Yes, great. But again, that's Harley Parker's milieu, is the ROM just behind the university. It was part of the university during the 50s, during the post-war years.
Right.
So those early exploration group meetings at the ROM in the basement cafeteria were, very important. Harley was the host.
The ROM provided the physical space for gathering the Toronto School of Communication to some extent. I think the exploration group is one of the most important episodes for the Toronto School for a broader Toronto School of Communication history and present, hopefully. And so great. Now, thank you for reminding that. So Rome Museum played an instrumental role in that. Absolutely great. All right. And by the way, so if you can keep an eye on the chat, Gary, you will see they are still discussing about Rome, Harley Parker. Of course, Andrew reminded that Harley was part of the McLuhan Fordham theme also. The Fordham in 1968. Great. And what else? There are a few. Okay, there is a Facebook user who didn't grant permission for grabbing name and photo profile. So be reminded, folks, if you want to show up on the live stream with your comments, please visit streamyard.com/Facebook. So you grant permission to grab your name and photo profile. So no privacy issues, just name and photo profile. All right, all right. So nice that you see how our community is responsive, Gary. Huh? You see, it's nice. And by the way, I want to tonight is the last live Monday night webinar. Next week, I said that there will be the best of Monday night webinars, the best of. In 2 weeks, the Global Village Day, July the 20th. But I like to point out that I just ignited the fire, okay? But there is such a nice community of people in the McLuhan's Media Ecology, the McLuhan Institute YouTube channel. So there is a nice community that really wanted to gather, even in this state of isolation. They wanted to gather and share ideas, share comments, questions, and so on. So I'm very grateful to the community. So again, it's not just me hosting the webinars. I just ignite the fire, but you all, folks, you are, including my special guests, you are the wood burning, right, and firing our global imagination. So thank you all for being part of this great community. And then again, so there is Steve. Hello, Steve, reminding us that explorations was an incredibly important milestone for the discipline. Yes, absolutely. And all right. So Gary, as usual, I'll be back to you to keep chatting. I want to dig more on your take on the lessons we are learning from the current scenario and many other thoughts. So we will be keep chatting again shortly after introducing our third guest. Okay, Gary, I'll see you later. Thank you. All right. And so, yes, time to move on. Let me see my schedule here. It's all on the thing. By the way, right. I wanted to again. Speaking of the McLuhan's community, I'm so grateful. Since we started the Monday night webinars, the Marshall McLuhan's Facebook group grew up, actually. There were more than 250 new members over the past few weeks. So that's incredible. 14% plus. So more than 250 new members. So I wanted to say welcome to all those more than 250 new members. Welcome into the Marshall McLuhan's Facebook group and to the Marshall McLuhan's community. And so hope you are enjoying this opportunity for sharing and creating and making ideas, not just sharing. And again, we will celebrate on July the 20th, the Global Village Day, with this McLuhan-esque marathon. So keep an eye. All right, time to... I see, okay, by the way, I see on the chat... folks are keep commenting on the explorations journal and the exploration group, which was again a milestone for the Toronto School of Communication and the McLuhan's community, the McLuhan's scholarship as well. So great. And by the way, folks, get ready to share your questions for our special guests tonight, okay? And in fact, talking about art, McLuhan's cohort, talking about how Marshall McLuhan was able to interact with the artistic scene in Toronto, with the art environment. Our next guest speaker is our next guest speaker is a Toronto-based experimental filmmaker, scholar, associate professor at the School of Image Arts at Ryerson University. And Ryerson, the McLuhan's community knows very well, Ryerson is another milestone for the earlier McLuhan's experiments in media and communication, the famous Ryerson experiment. So I'm glad that we have another connection to Ryerson. And by the way, Ryerson has a special, I think it's a guest room, it's a seminar room named by Marshall McLuhan. So from Ryerson University. She graduated actually in the media arts at Ryerson, and then PhD and MA at communication and culture, ComCult at York University, York Ryerson. And by the way, let me point out how the ComCult program in Toronto and Canada, and globally, but Canada and Toronto particularly, the ComCult program, it's a springboard for many media scholars, media and communication scholars, many as well, and the Marshall McLuhan's, Harold Innis, the Toronto School legacy. And ComCult really provided a great, again, springboard for many media scholars. It's a joint program, Ryerson and York. I hope U of T one day will join the ComCult, right? So the ComCult program, because it will be the perfect combination, the perfect triangle to really support the scholarship in medium theory, media studies, but medium theory scholarship. So again, our next guest speaker graduated and doctorated at ComCult, and her doctoral research concentrated on feminine aesthetics in avant-garde cinema and body art. Among many other publications, she authored forthcoming Oxford Handbook of Screen Dance, and her because I told you she's also a filmmaker and video maker. She is part and co-founder of the Toronto-based experimental film collective. It's called the Loop Collective. And so I think her intellectual and artistic works are combined together to better understand how art and technology and media are related to each other. And in fact, she's also, for the McLuhan's community, I think she is well known in our community for a special article on Sorel Etrog, right? The Sorel Etrog, the artist who used to work with Marshall McLuhan, and the very idea of spirals, right? So another connection to art, another connection to the Toronto's scene, artistic scene back in the time. So, and it's my great pleasure after this long, maybe too long, but important, special introduction, to welcome in the Monday night webinar Izabella Pruska-Oldenhof. Izabella, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
All
Thank
right,
you.
all
I'm
right.
quite well, and thank you for the lovely introduction.
Yes, it was a kind of creative and out of because I do thank Alex Koskes for putting together the biographies, but then I like to play with biographies my own way. So Izabella, where are you right now? So in Toronto somewhere?
Yes, I'm in Toronto in the King and Bathurst area.
Okay.
So I'm in my, I guess, home office. I decided to change scenery. My husband usually works here, and I take over the bedroom, and that becomes my office. But so it's nice to have a change and return to the main floor. So I've been quarantined with my husband and a 10-year-old son. And it has been a very interesting experience.
I see, with 4 kids, I know very well. Interesting. It's a kind of, let's say, oxymoron on the very idea of lockdown. So, however, it's interesting. So we are learning a lot how to deal with this state.
Thank you for the plug for communication and culture program. I
You have been also you have been serving as director of the program, right? So
Yes, I served a few years ago, and again, just over the last 6 months, and my term as an acting program director of communication and culture just finished a couple of days ago. So
all right.
I must say it was I took over the position just to fill in for a colleague who was on sabbatical, and none of us thought that we were going to be hit with the pandemic. So
Sure.
it was certainly a very interesting experience, but in some ways it also tests your own abilities. How what you're capable of doing, what are your limitations. So it's, as I said, it's been an interesting experience in that sense. But I should say that the communication and culture program, one of its co-founders was a student of Marshall McLuhan, Don Gillies. So
Right. Who has been teaching for a long while at Ryerson, right?
that's right. He was one of the kind of the original faculty members, and he was, I would say, the primary faculty member who would focus or would be teaching Marshall McLuhan's texts. And this is how I was introduced to McLuhan. It was in the courses I took with him. Coincidentally, at the School of Image Arts, where Don Gillies taught, a number of years later, when I started to teach, I was sharing my office with Hugh Innes, who was Harold Innes's son. So in some ways, the Toronto School of Communication, I think, had more connections to Ryerson than just...
Hold on a second. His son,
Yes.
teaching at Ryerson, what?
He was teaching a course titled Communication, Culture, and Technology.
Huh. At Ryerson.
Yes, at the School of...
But did he take an academic position, or it was just a session?
It was an academic position, and in some ways he liked being at Ryerson. He told me one time that he said he was hiding at Ryerson, kind of out of the spotlight that many of his siblings, I guess, were exposed to. And, he was quite content over there because nobody was paying attention to him. But he was, both him and Don Gillies were the key faculty members involved in the media arts program. And I was a student of that program. So I would say that's how I was actually introduced to the Toronto School of Communication. Right. And then my own practice as a filmmaker, I would say, comes out of more of that tradition, looking at the medium itself and exploring it, as opposed to cinema studies.
I see. But actually, speaking of cinema studies, I like to mention, I think, another of your mentors, particularly in the film studies and aesthetics, which is the great and only Bruce Elder. Bruce Elder, again, a fine, one of the greatest intellectuals I ever known in Toronto. I ever met in Toronto, and I think it was Bruce Elder who was part of your let's say focus on arts, video making, and he was responsible for bringing you into that world, I think, right?
Yes, no, absolutely. I think you chose your words very, very well. I often say that I actually blame him for introducing me to this. to the world of experimental cinema because I love it, but at the same time, it's not an area that is particularly appreciated very much in this country. And even at some universities, it's not even viewed as a, as an important area. But at the same time, when I should maybe say I was not even going to go in that direction, but I decided to take a course on experimental cinema with Bruce, experimental film processes. And when in that very first class, when he showed us a few films, and they spoke to me right away, and I figured out that part of the reason why I did not like film the way it was taught in my program is because it was based on a kind of a linear narrative progression. And I was much more interested in working in an intuitive and process-based way. And so when I met Bruce, it really was a revelation for me. I guess in many ways, I am very appreciative for that. Because it's through this that, through my making, that also helps me better understand McLuhan. And I've also had so many amazing opportunities to also meet amazing filmmakers and visual artists in Canada and in other places. So it has been wonderful.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned that. And the Loop Collective, Dan
Brown. Yeah.
Dan Brown, yes. And by the way, talking about the McLuhan's scholarship at Ryerson, we have to mention another great that unfortunately passed away last year, which is Robert Scott. Robert Scott, and thank you, Sal, for reminding that Robert Scott was a film professor at Ryerson, a student of Marshall McLuhan back in the 70s. And I think, we mentioned Robert Scott, Bruce Elder, so there's a cluster of scholars at Ryerson, right, that really brought the McLuhan's legacy into life, right, at Ryerson.
And actually, Bob was my teacher too, and I actually was not aware that he passed away. So
no, it was a huge loss, and so we will remember Robert Scott for his for his great smiles and great insights at the McLuhan Center. So great, Robert. And so glad that also we've been talking about Bruce Elder. So by the way, folks in the Marshall McLuhan's community, young scholars, students, and so on, check it out. Bruce Elder's works on McLuhan's and the Toronto School of Communication. You will get a lot of great insights. So great. And you are the new generation, right, Izabella? You are the new McLuhan's generation of Ryerson.
I guess so. Well, I have been teaching McLuhan ever since I started teaching in the communication and culture program. So part of the reason why I decided to do that is when I shouldn't be saying this, but when I started in the program, I believe that Harold Innes was, I guess, more of interest to majority of the professors. Mm-hmm. And so I just thought to myself, well, all of the McLuhan that I've learned, I pretty much learned on my own, in part, with the exception of my undergrad, just basic introduction. So when I started teaching in a communication and culture program, I just thought, okay, I don't think any student should be graduating from the communication and culture program without actually having a very good foundation in the Toronto School of Communication. So, of course, including Innes and McLuhan and Havelock. And so I took on McLuhan because I was teaching a advanced communication technology course, and I based it around his idea of artists and how they work with how the works are anti-environments that in some ways protect people from the to protect people from the new technological environments by exposing them a bit at a time. So so this actually has turned into a course, and I have been teaching it for many years. And yeah, that has been my main occupation.
I'll stop you here because I like to dig deeper into the very idea of anti-environments and even in contemporary terms, so related to what's going on these days around us. So I'll be back to you, and we will discuss about the kind of anti-environments, the kind of insights that we can learn in the current scenario. Okay. Thank you, Izabella. Thank you. And by the way, Izabella, you're back. Izabella, just say I wanted to show you Masood. You is one of the best. So one of your fans is here.
One of my students. Hello, Masood.
One of your students. Great,
Yeah.
Masood. I didn't know Masood was your. Right now I know the connections. Okay, great. Okay, Izabella, I'll see you later shortly. Thank you. And talking about saying hi and waving, let me say hi to Miguel from Goa, India, a global village. So hello, Miguel. Thank you for joining us from India. And I see a nice discussion going on the chat on U of T, Ryerson, the anti-environment. Okay, Andrew did another pun. You did it. You made it. An anti-environment is anything you can get away with. Okay, yeah, there is always an anti-environment. That's right. Okay. And talking about Comcult, talking about Ryerson University, I wanted to bring back to my guest from York University, Jody. Let me see if Jody, are you still here? Here she is. All right. So Jody, let's so firstly, have you ever taught at the Comcult program, in the Comcult program? Any relation to the Comcult?
I have taught in it, and I've supervised a number of PhD theses, maybe 6 or 7. I'm not sure. I'm currently supervising 2.
Right. And so, thank you for your contribution to the to growing the new pillars, the new champions of the Toronto School of Communication from York and Ryerson. In fact, from U of T, I'm very jealous. Let me admit that, because Comcult is at
U of T, Paolo. You have the McLuhan Center at U of T.
We have the McLuhan Center. You're right. We have the Book and Media Studies program, which is a unique undergraduate program, mainly focused on the McLuhan's legacy. But again, so Comcult really, in terms of master and PhD program, is one of the best in Canada. And again, folks on Facebook and YouTube, if you are considering taking a master or PhD in communication studies and media studies, check it out, the Comcult. It's a great program. And so nice that you were part of that. And secondly, Jody, let's go back to your projects and your topic. We were discussing about the idea of animals as media or mediums, right, in our human culture, and not only in contemporary culture. Any ideas, any relationship to, because if we think about animals nowadays, we soon think about virus, of course, right? So any connection between that ideas?
Yes, I've been thinking a lot about that actually, because somebody said to me a few weeks ago, could you think of a virus as being an evolutionary tool? And I said, well, we can't think about evolution anymore as a purely biological entity. And so if we're looking at the virus that appeared in this pandemic and has appeared in all of the pandemics in the last few years, they're all brought about by a meeting between several different species in an environment that is partly changing due to climate change. So we have so many different processes that are being brought about within the particular body of a particular animal. Let's say the pangolin, because people have talked a lot about the pangolins as being one of the contributors possibly to the COVID-19 virus. And I've thought, we started to think about viruses almost metaphorically. We have viruses and memes online and so forth. We have animals as semiotics online, but this is a biological agent. But, I think a lot about how McLuhan said, whenever there's a new medium, we have to abandon our old ways of thinking and try to find new ways of thinking that can recognize what is new in this new situation, rather than trying to fit it into an old model. So I've been trying to think, how would you think about these viruses in these bodies, these animal bodies coming together in these situations in a new way post-pandemic? So that's what I'm thinking about right now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And what about the idea that virus, in terms of the viralities, as an entity able to spread, able to really germinate and spread everywhere, it's a kind of course, it reminds us the viral culture of our human culture. So everything we do in terms of memes, it's viral, right? So there is a kind of connection in terms of virality of the actual human artifacts, right? So
but the challenge that we have now, if we're going to think about how we're thinking differently in the wake of this pandemic, is not to think about them as only human and not to think about them as only metaphorical. You see, and just
right.
the global village is not only human, it's also animal,
Right.
and it's also technological. And so how do we find new ways of thinking about these viruses? Yes, it is like a viral meme, very much so, except, of course, with much worse consequences.
Yeah. No, thank you for reminding us. This kind of a systemic vision. We can approach human culture from a broader perspective, as a systemic perspective, as a more ecological consciousness. So the idea that we are part of a broader entity, the human, the planet Earth, and so we are part of the same system. That's absolutely great. And in fact, may I ask you something about the environmental humanities? There is a nice environmental humanities group at U of T. They do a lot of events, and they are really pushing and fostering this brand new, let's say, approach to the idea of rethinking humanities from an environmental perspective. How did you came to the environmental humanities, and what's going on at York about the environmental humanities?
Well, York has an environmental studies program, but I'm in a humanities department. And I think our humanities department is very interdisciplinary. So we would include courses on culture and technology within our mandate. So our approach to environmental humanities wouldn't just be, let's say, literary or book oriented. It could be narrative oriented, or it could be oriented towards plants, what are the narratives that we build up around plants or around evolution?
Yeah. I like this focus on the narratives. So the narratives that shape our collective imaginary, and possibly fostering a better future for our humanity. So the narratives that really matter in order to take the right decisions for the future of our planet Earth. Nice. Absolutely. And so your book on the you also published an article on the Canadian Journal of Communication on animals as mediums or media. Why do you use mediums and not media? Just a philological question.
Did
mediums,
I used medium, animal as a
No.
medium of communication?
mediums. Yeah, maybe my mistake. I was just wondering.
I don't know whether I use medium or medium, but I tried to develop. So McLuhan is basically saying that we humans are very incomplete. We are not self-contained bodies. We have, let's say, pens and wheels and all kinds of extensions of our bodies. So I tried to rethink that idea of incompletion, to think about the ways that we are also interdependent with animals and how we also use animals to communicate. So I made the argument in this article as the animal as medium that you could see McLuhan as one of the earliest post-humanists because he didn't try to understand the human as a self-contained entity. He tried to understand the human as being defined by our interaction with technologies and tools. So I just said that's right, and also with animals and other kinds of bodies.
Yeah. And in fact, in McLuhan's terms, for most of our global civilization, animals are extensions of humans because they can do what we used to do even better than us, right? So horses or any other thing. So animals as a technology, as an extension of humans. That's very interesting. I'm very, very fascinated by that, Jody. Great. And let's, in the meantime, folks, I see folks on Facebook and YouTube keep commenting and making puns and so on. Feel free to share your questions for Jody, then Izabella, Gary, for our guests. So feel free to share your questions anytime. Okay, so we're gonna take your questions as soon as you share it. So feel free to share your questions for our special guests. Okay, and there are a few comments actually. Ruth Ann, animals are good to think with. This is Levi-Strauss. And yes.
Okay, so here's the thing. It's not just that animals are extension of us, but we might be extensions of animals as well. Like there's a very famous line from Derrida, quoting from Michel de Montaigne, written in 1590. When I'm playing with my cat, how do I not know? How do I know the cat is not playing with me? She's toying with me. In other words, I'm just a toy for my cat. And what is so great about that is that it's basically challenging us to think about ourselves from the point of view of something that is not us.
Right.
For instance,
the so-called absolutely. Yeah, the anthropocentrism, right? So the idea that we always put the anthropocentric approach to what we study instead. That's why I like your book. It changes the perspective. It changes the way we approach our relationship to animals. Great. And I like the idea of playing because animals, we do play with animals, and playing games and playing are part of our symbolic, right? Symbolic imaginary. So when we play, we do exercise our imagination. Do you think so? So when animals play with us, what do they think? How do you interpret the playing between animals and humans?
Well, depends on which kind of animals, but different kinds of animal. I mean, sometimes, birds play differently from cats, which play differently from dogs. But there's definitely, we're starting to recognize that so many of the attributes that we thought were just human. Animals can play, birds can play, they can pretend, they can deceive, they can make ethical decisions that we think are only unique to human. So we're learning a lot about animals that we didn't know maybe 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And I'm interested in that because then I'm thinking, what are we doing with that knowledge? So now I'm looking at robot pets. So if anybody knows anything about, send me an email. What does it mean? How is it different to play with a robotic pet than with a real one? That's my current.
Exactly. That will be your next book. So our animals got to be turned into a actual technology. Absolutely, that would be great. I think we've been discussing about robotic pets during the webinars a few weeks ago. Absolutely, I think we've been discussing. Now I can't recall, but I'll dig deeper. Great. So and now I'm curious to keep discussing about this topic, but from the semiotic perspective of our special guest Gary. So I'll be back to you, Jody, for another merry-go-round. Okay. And so, Gary, here you are, and now it's your take because we've been discussing about all these things. But I was curious to firstly, maybe on the same argument, on the same discussion we had with Jody about the symbolic function of animals in the human society and human culture, on the idea that animals are symbols through which we were able to create worlds. And still today animals are charged with kind of special powers and special functions and so on. So what's your take on that?
I had a very intense period of studying animals in the 1980s and early 90s, and I wrote quite a bit about the use of animals in war and in military campaigns as media of communication, and in the advertising of fighter jets and weaponry. So I had a kind of historical model that I was working with and brought it right into the present time. My main interest, though, I tackle animals now via this interest that I've developed into modeling, primarily communication modeling in the post-war era, in the 1940s and 1950s. And one of the things that happened with models was that it was an incredibly interdisciplinary time, especially in cybernetic circles. And every discipline was struggling to establish some kind of model that would guide its analysis of the world. One of the things that McLuhan used to point out was that, physics borrowed from biology, communication borrowed from mathematics, mathematics borrowed from et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One of those things that occurred in animal studies, though, with regard to modeling, was that there was a massive breakthrough in the 1980s with Donna Haraway's work on cyborgs, where she pointed out quite rightly that there has been a fundamental change in the way in which we conceive of animals as living models. That is, animals that are designed and genetically modified to serve in experiments, investigating cures for cancer, and later on in cures for obesity, and so forth. And so these are commercially produced animals, so-called living models, which serve one purpose and then are disposed of in all of the university research labs around the world. Now, the thing is, the connection which is important today is the idea of the living model, the animal, even the animal that is has a single purpose, is agential. That is one of the most key points, and Jody made it quite nicely, was that animals have agency. And even though we may not recognize it, when they get out of their cages, they have agency. When they bite us, they have agency. When they emit particular odors, they have agency, and they're communicating with us. But there's something else that's happened during the pandemic to heighten animals as media. And that is that they have exposed the idea that humans are now living models in an experiment perhaps initiated by viral passage among different animal species to humans, and that we are living models of the fragility of life. And we are struggling so much during this period to use a model, the SRI model from epidemiology, which is so hopelessly outdated and was originally created in the late 1920s and has been patched together repeatedly since that time to try to manage a completely novel virus with an old, outdated conception. So you see the connection between the animal and the model, and the medium and the agential nature of non-human life. So that's I'm very close to Jody in terms of her thinking, in terms of a post-humanist framework, but also in my sense, I think a lot about models. Now, when this pandemic started, I immediately attempted to jump into the fray and try to say something reasonably intelligent about the failure of modeling, the debates about, in Canada, as you know, we've had many public discussions about epidemiological models, and we've had our sort of health, political health leaders tell us repeatedly, well, these models are close, not as bad as guesswork, but are pretty close to that. They have no magical properties, and they're very fragile, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's more important in my mind to say something positive about modeling, to educate the public about what a model can do, can't do. Even though we don't need to get into the nitty-gritty of the mathematics involved in any way, we need to know that there are always simplifications involved. There are always exclusions. Some things in those simplifications are simply left out. Some models are inherited from a long tradition and are patched together and don't work all that well when faced with novel criteria. And if you look back on the history of the use of models, which is, if you're a scientist and you learn how to you learn your modeling from off-the-shelf models, like most people, from software now. The whole craft tradition of building models out of tin and wood and glue and paper and string, that's over. They're all simulations now. They're all digital simulations. So we tend to lose that tactile element that modeling was once in science, very, very significant kind of craft activity. So that's almost gone. And now we have all digital modeling and simulations. So, I mean, to me, the susceptible, infected, and recovered SIR model, which has dominated our thinking over the last 4 months, is part of the problem and not part of the solution. So
what do you mean by that?
Well, my thinking about models is about the the usability of models and disposability of models. I mean, they're not particularly, in 1927, this may have been a very hot mathematical model. It had a lot of assumptions that don't really fit today's environment. The other thing is that it's not just one model, but it's competing models all around the world. So every lab will have a variation on this. So we have the Imperial College of London, model. We have the Johns Hopkins models. We have, all these competing models, which are essentially derived from the same model from the 20s, souped up versions and patched together of the same idea that there's these three categories and that we need to fit into these three categories. there are many things that are left out. There are many important facts that were never accounted for during that period. And so that's my kind of semiotic entry point, modeling.
Yeah.
And I like to think about animals in terms of models.
Yeah.
As
Yeah,
well.
and modeling, it's is framing, right? So the idea that depending on how you frame something, you will get different results. You can get different interpretations. Modeling means a specific take, a specific semantic environment within which you understand that thing.
Representational strategy given a certain number of simplified parameters. Hopefully those parameters are pertinent to the problem you're trying to address. It's not always obvious. We didn't know, we have models about climate change. We have models about economic recovery. We have models about everything.
And so, am I right if I say that models are, let's say, a model is a sign system, in semiotic terms, is a sign system? It makes sense as a sign system. It is coherent. It is consistent as a sign system, but it's closed.
It's a world. It's a world. It sits between empirical reality and abstract theory. It has its own little universe. I mean, think of Claude Shannon and Warren Weaver's line drawings, simple line drawings of communication. Those were very sparse worlds, very limited to a few two-dimensional lines and boxes and an arrow or two. But when you think of much more sophisticated, double helix, for instance, models, you look at models of projections of how the poles are melting, and you can run those quickly through the decades forward and see how the projection changes. I mean, those are very sophisticated and becoming progressively more sophisticated versions of essentially the same thing. A representation that sits in between facts and theory. And now in our particular PandeMedia moment, we are trying to make behavior fit models. We're trying to make the human behavior semiotically coherent so that we try
consistent to that model, right?
Shelter, stay at home, wear your mask. But all these things are debatable. Does the model have sufficient information for it to verify the effectiveness of those things? No, there are debates raging about, how effective are these practices actually? Which is more effective? Shutting the airports, or closing the schools, closing the malls, wearing a mask, etc. It's a very, very interesting moment.
Right. And talking about models and linguistic models, what's your take on the very idea, the very language we use to conceptualize the pandemic, usually as a war against the invisible enemy, the virus, and so on. On the other hand, it's not a war, it's a matter of careness and taking care of each other and do your part and so on. What's your take on the linguistic representation of the current, again, I like to call it semantic environment. So the idea that we make sense of how we undertake what's going on around us. So what's your linguistic semantic take on this?
Well, there's some very highly ideological conceptual language used when we discuss the effectiveness of modeling and the how we get to fit, how models tell us how we have to behave, which becomes a political problem. So the language that we choose in, for instance, characterizing models in terms of their negative capacities, that it's not a magic bullet, folks, that kind of talk, that leads us to believe simultaneously that the scientific community is working with the best information that it has, but is also extremely limited by the fact that it can't control, as we all know well around the world, the political manipulation, the social disadvantages, the stratification that occurs and is exposed during the pandemic between those who are more likely to be infected and those who are less likely to be infected. All of those factors become very important with respect to the way that we characterize the social and political imaginary is laid bare, essentially, in the choices that we make linguistically to talk about the model.
Yep, I agree. Wow, thank you for sharing that. And perfect, it's 9:30, so it's I'll be back to you, Gary, for another merry-go-round. Okay, maybe we're going to engage in more discussion with our other guests. So, but I'll be back to you, okay, Gary? All right, thank you. And Izabella, where is Izabella? Let me see if I can bring her back. Here you are. So Izabella, talking about models and environments, semantic environments, and so on. I think we were discussing about the idea of environment and anti-environment as a conceptual framework to understand what's going on nowadays on virus and the way we face the virus. Your take. But firstly, unmute yourself. I saw you are muted. All right. How we can use the framework environment, anti-environment to face the current situation?
Well, one way to think about it is to think of art as an anti-environment, and what it does, it actually functions like a prophylactic vaccine. So McLuhan noted on several occasions that the artists produce these anti-environments through by making artworks, and these retrain our perceptual faculties for the eventual arrival of the new technology in its, I guess, at full force. So then I guess we have in this way developed some kind of a means of coping with it, of being adjusted to it, knowing when we're being surprised by it and what it might do. So that's why I think of art as an anti-environment, being like a vaccine, because vaccines ultimately are substances that are used to stimulate a production of antibodies in order to for the immune system to begin working and develop antibodies for it, for the virus that is being introduced in a small amount. So that's what I was just thinking in connection to our present environment and art. And some of this was also from the quote that I sent you, Paolo. And the quote was, it's from McLuhan, and it's in Laws of Media in the book. And he says, the artist is the person who invents the means to bridge between biological inheritance and the environments created by technological innovation. So this was the quote that I've selected, and I felt very much that that particular quote represents our current moment. And in that context, I was thinking very much of art as an anti-environment and art as a vaccine. Perhaps this is a very strange take on it.
Izabella,
yeah.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question for you also because I'm experiencing some technical troubles, so I need to. But I have a question for you. I'll let you speak, and then I'll be back. So the idea of vaccination as anti-environments, right? For humans to face the virus.
I'm sorry, you cut off, and I did not hear the question you asked.
Yeah, because I'm experiencing some technical trouble, so I'll let you speak. Vaccinations as anti-environments, right?
Yes.
All right, go ahead. So I can reboot my system, and I'll be back to you. So what about this connection between conceiving vaccinations as anti-environments?
Okay. Well, I think I already spoke about it, but just to, I guess, to continue. I guess just kind of thinking more broadly about actually McLuhan's quote, that artists are those who kind of create those the bridges, and it kind of one has to think about also the etymology, I guess, of technology and its actual connection to art and making in the first place. So I. And that's why I do feel that the art has an important place to play in when it comes to technology and artists as not only the fact that they are their perceptual faculties are more heightened, but they also, Paolo, as you said, people who play, when we play, we exercise imagination. And it's what artists do. Artists play and make their media pliable and plastic. And I do think that by playing with the media, they see it, they experience it in a different way, or as you said, they engage or in it. They see it in a different light than one normally would. Sorry, this connection is actually proving very challenging to speak about this, because I don't know how much of what I said was already heard, and how much wasn't.
Yeah.
So
In fact, I'm not sure what happens actually. However, so I think now we are good. So I still see some issues. So I let Jody and Gary come in the discussion. So what's your take, Jody and Gary, about the idea of environment and anti-environments? So my core question, it's the lessons we are learning from the current scenario, the current situation. So we have been experiencing a unique, unprecedented times, as they say, but what we can learn from the current situation. Gary, you go first.
I wanted to summarize what I said before by simply saying that animals create anti-environments and expose so many things that we hadn't clearly been able to visualize in terms of the fragility of the ecosphere and the virality of interspecies communication.
Right. And Jody, what's your take? What's the lessons? What are the lessons we are learning from the current scenario?
I think we think of pandemics the way we think about fires or floods, that there are disruptions to a system that we want to go back to. And I think what we're learning is that it's the system that we feel is being disrupted that is the problem. So we're realizing that for instance, the amount of deforestation, which has led to things like the wet markets or these cross fertilization of viruses across animal and human bodies. This is something that we're doing. And it's not, so how do we learn to think about this as something that's not disrupting a system that we want to get back to? It is in the very nature of the system. You could think about how Virilio talked about the accident, maybe Gary, in relation to this, but it's really showing us that everything from what we eat to how we think about biology in relation to ourselves, it's very problematic. And it's also really problematic because even though we're so globally connected now, and we can find out all the time, we can get live maps of the virus, we can see where it's developing in the world. We are so connected. And I don't know about you guys, but do you find it hard to concentrate? I mean, it's incredibly hard to concentrate. I'm learning something new every day. I mean, so many facts. Do you know a zookeeper was killed yesterday in a zoo in Zurich by a tiger? I have so many facts. So how do we build a model out of these facts is really hard to say. But what we have to understand is that what feels like a huge disruption to our everyday life, and we want to go back to normal, we really don't want that normal. That normal is bad for us. That normal is going to destroy the planet. And if I can add one more word, we have significantly less coverage of climate change in the media now than we did 20 years ago. So it's like we're in the middle of a huge heat wave in Toronto. Are we finding people saying, we have some climate change issues here? It's 100 degrees in Siberia. And how might this be related to the pandemic? So we have the technology for making all of these connections, but we don't have the focus, and we don't have a sort of public knowledge system who wants to engage with it. So we're very fortunate that we can sit here and think together about these issues.
Yeah. I like you brought up the idea of that through this pandemic, we should retrieve an holistic vision about the planet, which includes the idea that the way we conceive our environment and economy and education. We've been discussing a lot about education over the past Monday night webinars. So now is the time to retrieve that kind of holistic vision, to not go back to that normal. We didn't like that normal, right? So the normal before the pandemic was not the best ideal scenario for our planet and humankind and animals as well. So that's why, again, retrieving that holistic vision and connecting what's going on right nowadays with the environmental crisis, the environmental emergency, right? I will say emergency, speaking of the language, the environmental emergency. I think the UNESCO pointed out how important it is nowadays to face the current pandemic, to retrieve that kind of environmental consciousness, right? It's a call to action to rethink the way we are undertaking and using our planet sources. And that might be a good opportunity. So if we want to think optimistically, but also if we want to take our own action, now is the time to, I think, retrieve the environmental consciousness to not go back to the normal, but to build a better normal, right?
But we have to always remember that there's not just one ecology. There's always the mutual imbrication of the mental, the social, and the environmental, physical economy, the physical ecology. So it's a beautiful, the three ecologies vision of Guattari is probably the most pertinent, I think, today, as it was in the late 80s when he was trying to envisage the future.
Plateau.
And without one, with only one focus, we'll get it wrong again. So we have to be moving with three lenses always on our faces, at least.
Well,
Yeah.
I would
Alfonso,
like to
Guattari, the three ecologists. Izabella, sorry for interrupting. Go.
I also wanted to mention that the other thing that we are also missing, or maybe that has come more into the fore, is is the fact that even within this group, in many ways we are privileged that we have access to the internet. We have a home where we can actually watch each other and speak, but not everybody has access to the internet. And not everybody has the time to actually engage online and to participate in the global village, electronic global village. The one thing that, at least with my students, and we hear more and more from students, is that they miss the physical presence. And I think it has brought that into the fore. And we keep on forgetting about that. And I think, Jody, you've mentioned the planet, which is very much a physical thing, and it affects us. And in some ways, this the internet and this kind of remote way of being together, on one hand, it permits us to momentarily forget about it, but then it also reminds us that in fact, we are connected, but only as discarnate beings, right? And not all of us are included. And I think that's an important part, the ethics of it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been discussing about the idea of digital equality, digital equity, right? So the idea that everyone must be entitled to access to internet, particularly in this moment. So conceiving internet as a human right, so connecting to internet as a human right, as a basic need for letting people stay connected and thrive and deal with everything we need. So and it's important to not leave anyone behind, right? So we also have to really be very careful about we take for granted that we can connect to internet, and instead there are many people that cannot, and not only how many people, but also the quality of the way we can learn on the web, the quality of the interactions we undertake on the web, the quality of the learning we can experience. So I think the idea of digital equity, it's very well focused right now. So because of this state of crisis and isolation, right, Jody?
But our conversation about digital equity also has to take into account that the people who suffer the worst consequences of climate change are the people who contribute to it the least. So when we're thinking about digital equity, we also have to think about things like, how are we going to develop better energy resources so that we're not subjecting people in significant parts of the globe to literally uninhabitable circumstances?
Yep. And if not, thank you, Jody. Jody, in fact, Clinton, that's a question for all the panelists. Do any of the panelists want to comment on the disservices of the commercial web and the services of saving lots of people off of it?
Oh, you mean, is he saying that we should fight for the internet as a public resource?
I think so. Yeah, I do. I do get the same. So maybe Clinton, can you reformulate in a better? Yeah, of course. I think that's the point. So internet as a public resource, as a public service, and particularly if we really face with the current situation. So yes.
What wasn't the argument at the beginning of the sort of commercialization of the internet between those who wanted to corporatize and those who wanted to see the internet as a utility, as a utility, like sewers and water mains and roads and electrical grids. And that argument is now virtually gone from the way we think about it. But that was an important moment to try to keep public a resource, so much of which, especially the World Wide Web part, maybe not the internet part, which is absolutely a whole different discussion, but was not subject to some intellectual property regime in the first place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. To keep internet an open, inclusive, and not centralized place, because I think eventually Clinton clarified his thoughts, the idea of commercial internet, so the idea of centralization. So instead, I think it's important to decentralize internet, so in order to really make it as a more open, more inclusive, more diverse, and more inclusive in terms of access, in terms of the so-called digital divide. So the idea is that we cannot let just centralize internet on the hands of a few major players, right? So rethinking digital inclusion, inclusivity means rethinking the business models that run internet to some extent, right? So I think Clinton wanted to foster these ideas, right? So
well, I would add to that as well. It's not only the commercial models, but the governance model of the internet, which is completely American at the moment, and has been since the early invention of ARPANET. And that's part of the problem, is it isn't it may be a global quasi-utility, but it's certainly not, from its governance perspective, an international medium by any stretch of the imagination. So one of the things that I was thinking in terms of post-Snowden, how we think about these things after Snowden. And so after Snowden, that every medium is just a kind of way of exposing ownership, the failure of cryptography within the public domain, massive intrusive surveillance, and the complete capitulation of the large digital hegemons to the intelligence community.
Right.
Kindly, I mean, just to put it simply, there can't be any other explanation. And so the ones who expose that the most vociferously are the ones who are completely stranded and immobilized.
Right. I was keeping an eye on the comments. So this kind of argument and discussion stimulated many comments, I see. So thank you all for being part of this conversation on the idea of decentralizing internet.
The internet is already decentralized by the very nature of the internet as being a network. So I think that this is simply absurd to try to, and I mean, this is exactly what McLuhan used to talk about, the alphabetic and the print culture is meeting the tribal culture of the electromagnetic and electronic media. But we are also at an interesting moment, because internet is also a world repository of knowledge. And just like in the past, we used to have archives that were repositories of documents that included local or national information. And those archives are actually bursting open their walls and going online, so making that available. This is exactly what the internet is supposed to be. And, Paolo, you said, should that be a right? Well, just like the United Nations says that we have a right to education, by that very extension, people should have right to public and free internet as that repository of international knowledge.
But I think the point that Clinton is making is that not that only should it be decentralized, but that it should also be decommercialized. Because we can see what's happening with this immense control of organizations like Facebook and Google and so forth. But it's not just the internet. I don't know if you guys remember reading this article by someone who went to be the first sort of blogger for the New York Times, who came out of the independent media and said there used to be, may 1,000 bloggers bloom, but there's only one New York Times. So we do have a huge amount of commercial concentration. And so even, the kinds of news that people might have access to, it's a whole much larger subject, I suppose, than what we're talking about. But I think even McLuhan later in his life began to understand that, there were some issues surrounding, let's say, power and domination in his understanding of the global village that maybe he hadn't properly acknowledged to begin with when he was so enthusiastic.
Right.
I don't disagree, but that's why I think we have also all a choice to use open source and open access apps and support those who develop them. And for whatever reason, our universities are not, they prefer to actually go along with Google, with Adobe, and all the other
monopolies,
software companies that actually are quite parasitic in their relation to us. So,
as a monopoly, right? It's a monopoly of knowledge. Same like Harold Innis' insights on the idea of monopolizing knowledge in cultural technologies. Absolutely. Right.
The beautiful phrase of Peter Gallison's. He talks about the removal of knowledge, that the knowledge that we don't have access to is always far, far greater than the repository of knowledge that we do have access to. That's the old iceberg theory that the novel, in a sort of paranoid political culture, you could say, yes, it's the things that you can't possibly find out, but you absolutely need to find out, that are going to get you in the end.
Right. And well done, my friends. This time, usually, I do a final merry-go-rounds for some final remarks. And these are the final remarks, because tonight, this is the last Monday night webinar. Next week, there will be the best of. And then in 2 weeks, the Global Village Day. As usual, not as usual, for the first time ever, actually, we will run the Global Village Day McLuhan-esque marathon from noon to midnight. So, because this is the last Monday night webinar, I let you with some final remarks. So, maybe we can use the same order at the beginning. Jody, Gary, Izabella. Your final remarks, Jody.
Oh,
for tonight's Monday night webinar. The lessons we are learning from the PandeMedia, in the folklores from the lockdown age. So, what's your final remarks? Your final
I
words
guess
for
my
that?
final remarks would be that McLuhan taught us to think about the ecology of media, and that we're now understanding that this ecology of media embraces a vast range of agents and actors and technologies, which include everything from the internet to viruses, and that it's such a challenge. It's such a fascinating, amazing challenge to think about the ways that they interact, and ethically what we need to do to make those interactions sustainable. Because we're seeing a lot of loss of life right now, which is very sad. Although the last couple of days have also been very good news with the cancellation of 2 pipelines because of widespread protests, which is a plus thing that has been enabled by our global village. But we're also seeing, that we need to think about the ecology of media in a very rich way, cutting across all the hybridities that Haraway and other biologists and science theorists have taught us to think about, to even as we ourselves are both technological and ecological and biological and
Yep.
As far more to a final response. The UN gives us something like 8 years, 7 years now before it's too late to save the planet. So that would be a good final word for me.
All right. Thank you, Jody. Gary, your final remarks, your final words.
It's ironic, I think, that McLuhan's penchant for observing how readily we cross borders, across disciplines, across nations, through mediatic wormholes of various kinds, has been exposed now at the very moment when we need to cross over more than ever. We can't. The borders are closed, that connections are broken, and that we have a kind of uneven connectivity now that is physically constrained but virtually enhanced. So I think it's that disparity that we are all struggling with. But I want to say quickly, one of the most beautiful things that I experienced over the last 4 months being in downtown Toronto was to go down to Lake Ontario and to go out to the edge, the other side of the what used to be Ontario Place in the morning, and just stand by the lake, absolutely still, the air clear, the wildlife just humming with no noise, no jets, no vehicles. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. And we wish to be able to see again this kind of situation. Yes. And thank you, Gary, for sharing this nice thoughts. And Izabella, your final words, remarks.
Well, I think what this pandemic and our reliance more and more on the different software, and especially video conferencing software, has what it has done is actually it allowed us to, on one hand, explore more of the audiovisual potential of this particular medium and our connection through video conferencing. So being able to see and hear each other as opposed to only and primarily relying on textual exchanges in chat rooms or on Facebook and other places. So in some ways, we are using more of the audiovisual capabilities, and I would say in some ways then activating more of this retrieval of the oral dimension of this particular medium. At the same time, I wonder how much energy is being actually put towards and how many resources and pollution created in order to run so many simultaneous videos online.
Shocking, absolutely shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this, this is just something that I think that I guess made me realize, it's you've asked us to prepare a prop, didn't you?
Oh yes, we are running out of time, but however, no, because that's the last one. We can go slightly go. So, what's your object? Yes, yeah, the prop.
Okay, so I'm just going to end with this because I had to. I'm showing a T-shirt of Dream Serenade. Dream Serenade is a concert, a benefit concert that is being done for respite services at the Toronto District School Board. It's organized by parents, Hayden and his wife, and so for the past 5 years, they've been able to fill the entire Massey Hall and the Roy Thompson Hall with people, and in that and in those concerts, this was the only perhaps chance where many people would be actually introduced to very complex disabilities that many of the children and students in general at the Toronto District School Board have. So I'm raising this because with the pandemic, this won't be happening. And so this has been weighing quite heavily on my mind because it's those groups that are quite, how should I put it? Those are the groups that are already left in the outside the normal conversation, and in physical gatherings like concerts, and by inviting various artists to come in and enticing people to come over, this is how they learn about the lives not only of the children but of their families. So one thing I'm seeing is that some of these kind of physical and also important events I don't know whether they'll be able to be carried out. And it's something that I'm obviously very worried about and concerned. So, because it's not the same.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, rethinking our reimagine the post-pandemic future means reimagine the way we can foster cultural participation, democratic participation, and to some extent, the idea that we need to gather together in order to spark new ideas, in order to exercise our humanity, right, to some extent. And not only because tonight we have been thinking more and broader than just the human realm, but in terms of the not only humankind but also the planet Earth. Our global village is not made out of humans, but also all entities that are part of one ecology, one global village. From an ecological perspective, we need to really think systemically and putting things together in a very ecological way. So I really want to thank all my guest speakers and guests and friends for tonight, for being the last ones actually for this series of Monday night webinars. But as I say, so firstly, Thank you again to Gary Genosko, Jody Berland, and Izabella Pruska-Oldenhof. So thank you very much for being with us tonight. Then I want to thank all the speakers we had. I think we had more than 40 guests since the beginning of the Monday night webinars in April. So and many of them will be again with us with the Monday night for the Global Village Day. So stay tuned, because on July the 20th for the Global Village Day, the 12 hours McLuhanesque marathon, there will be many new guests, including Douglas Copeland and Michael McLuhan and so on, but also other guests from the Monday night webinars. So I'm very, very glad that we really put together a nice community of friends, colleagues, and champions, right, to really think and reimagine the post-pandemic world. I wanted to thank the community on Facebook and YouTube, Alex Koskis, the Marshall McLuhan's Galaxy blog, for supporting the series, Andrew McLuhan and the McLuhan Institute for hosting the live streams, and all folks in the community, in the Marshall McLuhan's Facebook group. So thank you very much for supporting and being part of this unique conversation, unique dialogues, unique exchanges of ideas, and sometimes even creating puns and creative ideas. So thank you all for your participation again. So we were part of the same community. I wanted to foster this sense of togetherness. I really felt to be together, to get together, ideally in this streamings over the past few weeks. As I said, so next week come back to the streaming live, because there will be a live premiere of the best of, so the best of the Monday night webinars, the best of next week. And instead, in 2 weeks, as we know, let me say it again, the Global Village Day, July the 20th. So stay tuned. So we will celebrate with an intellectual marathon the Global Village Day. So unique special guests. And again, if you have some ideas, it's a call for participation. The Global Village Day, it's not just my own event. It's open to the community. Okay, we are a community. I just igniting the fire, but we are all a community to bring new ideas, to rethink the global village, to rethink the global theater in the post-pandemic world, and absolutely. So please reach me out if you have any thoughts, ideas, special guests, people who are doing interesting things. So anything related to McLuhan, the global village, you are very, very welcome to let me know, and I will be happy to bring all those ideas during the Global Village Day. So Gary, Jody, Izabella, thank you again, folks in the Facebook group and the McLuhan Institute YouTube channel. Thank you very much.
Good night.
As usual.
Thanks, everybody.
We can say, we can touch, actually. We can say hi this way. Hello. Izabella, Jody, here we are. High five. High five. Hello. We can touch. All right. And as usual, stay safe, stay sage, and see you next week, the best of the Monday night webinars, and in 2 weeks, July the 20th, the Global Village Day. We will celebrate the Global Village Day. Have a good night. Ciao.
Have a good night. Ciao.
Night.
Good night. Bye.